Will Smith. He once said, "Nothing is realistic." It's not realistic to go into a dark room, push a button, and have all the lights come on. It's not realistic to bend a piece of metal, put people inside, and transport them through the air across an ocean. Thank goodness Thomas Edison and the Wright brothers didn't think so. I'd like to suggest tonight, his latest quote was that being realistic is the most commonly traveled road to mediocrity. And I can guarantee everyone in this room has not traveled that road. By your involvement and participation in the Air Cadet League, you folks have demonstrated beyond a doubt to me and to many others that you have not traveled that road, and you are on a very exceptional path. Some of your travels have taken you to places that we heard today, and some of the speaking demonstrations that I've been very humbled to get to follow, and all the other stories and adventures that I've been hearing throughout the day really reinforces my thoughts. So I'm going to be sharing some pretty exciting stories about airplanes and some flying experience, but most importantly, the message I want to share with you is some of the secrets to my success throughout my career. Because success leaves clues. And you have an opportunity here, now that you've established yourselves as Air Cadets and built a foundation for a future of leadership, of opportunity, and of growth, to really excel. And I think the best way that I can describe that is by giving you some tools. You see, we all carry a tool pouch. Every one of us has this invisible tool pouch on our side here. And what we do is we put those tools that we gather from our research, maybe listening to some TED Talks, maybe having an instructor or a mentor. And those tools are added to our tool pouch, and they serve us well throughout our lives if we have tough decisions to make. Maybe it's a decision on what course to take in university, or what career path to take. Or maybe it's a decision to deal with some very difficult people in your lives. So the tools that I'm going to share with you today, I'm hoping that you can add to your tool pouch, because they certainly have served me well. And one of the tools that I've used all along is the attitude of gratitude. And basically, people have said that I'm probably the luckiest pilot in the world. And I tell you, from this perspective, I definitely feel that way. I'm definitely one of the luckiest pilots that I know, and there's a reason for that, and I want to share that with you because I think that luck is something that we can all have. And the reason I say that is because I believe the definition of luck for me is that it's preparation. Am I adjusting lights? Who didn't pay their bill? Preparation meeting opportunity. Let me say that again. Luck is preparation meeting opportunity. And when you get those opportunities, you grasp them. So I want you to put that as your very first tool in your pouch today. That luck isn't something that just someone else has. Because believe me, when you start hearing some of the stories of the flying that I got to do, you're going to say, wow, that guy's lucky. Yeah, oh, that guy's really, really lucky. But I want you to know that you too can develop that sort of mindset and put that tool pouch to work in your future, whatever goals you have. So let me start by saying that I joined the military at the age of 17, not as a cadet, but as an Air Reserve technician. And when I first joined, I learned to polish shoes, making those little circles. I learned to press my uniform. I learned to stand at attention and march. I even joined a precision drill team. But I also learned a trade. I was an airframe technician and eventually became a crewman on the single otter. My love for flying started to increase so badly that I finally got accepted into the regular force, and I went to pilot training. And once graduated, I went on to Cold Lake, and I flew the basic fighter of the day, which was the F-5. Now, you can imagine when you're 21 years old and you're carrying live ordnance, low level over the northern Alberta and Saskatchewan weatherlands, and you're leading a foreplane at a very young age. It was a heavy responsibility, and it was a terrific opportunity. Upon graduation, the students on that course went on to either fly the CF-104 Starfighter over in Baden, Germany, or they stayed in Cold Lake or Bagotville on the F-5, supporting NATO in the northern flank, or we went on to fly the F-101 Voodoo, as was introduced. And the Voodoo, what I call the ultimate North American muscle car of the air. This thing was designed in the late 40s. It first flew in 1952. And to give you an idea of how much thrust this thing had, you know, you can imagine you're sitting in an airliner and it's about to take off. And as it takes off and it climbs up to its cruising altitude of about 35,000 feet, seatbelt sign comes off, the meal starts. That takes about 20 minutes. Would you agree? Well, in the Voodoo, when you go from brake release to 35,000 feet, it's 90 seconds. So it was a heck of a rocket ride, and it was a dynamic airplane to fly. And out on the West Coast, we would fly intercept missions, but the weather wasn't even always that good. Quite often, if you don't believe all the glossy brochures, the West Coast gets a lot of rain and a lot of cloud, and we fly formation in the cloud. And when you're flying formation in thick, dark West Coast cloud, you tend to get very close to your wingman. And you're kind of locked onto that little green navigation light on the right wing. What I noticed was many of the pilots there started to get very comfortable only on the right wing. They actually were not as confident to fly on the left wing. And I didn't like that idea. I thought, you know, if you're going to be a fighter pilot, you've got to be able to fly formation in any position. And so that comes up to my next offer of advice for a tool for you. And I call this expression, work on your backhand. How many have played racket sports? Badminton, tennis, squash? So as you know, many people are very comfortable with their forehand. But it doesn't take long before your opponent will realize he's going to start putting the ball over there. So you can either stand at the edge of the court and keep working your forehand, or you can actually work to balance yourself. And so my advice in life is that when you have a goal and you have an objective and you find that there's a weakness in your talents for that one goal that you're aiming for, then work on it. Because the dividends that it pays will not be reflected immediately, but further down the road. And I'm going to demonstrate that in just a moment. So I worked on my backhand. I became very competent on the left wing. And the payoff for that was that it became recognized on the squadron that I was a fairly strong formation pilot. And so at a very junior time, when they were selecting the formation demonstration team, I got selected. They said, let's put Dale on number 3. And it was something that probably wouldn't have happened had I not done that. So that was one of the benefits that I had. The next benefit that happened to me with my backhand theory was even more important. You see, instrument flying is a part of aviation. And I was not that good at instruments. I didn't even really like flying instruments. I liked looking outside. But I realized that I needed to work on my instrument skills. And I worked on them very hard. And again, that became recognized, and my supervisor offered me the opportunity to attend the instrument check pilot course. I was actually sent on course as a lieutenant, which was kind of unheard of in that day when I showed up being that young. But it meant that I got this patch, and it meant that I came back, and my first ticket ride that I had to conduct was actually on the base commander. It's a bit of a humbling experience. But the reason I'm sharing this with you is that later on, there's a sequence of events that started to unfold as a result of me working on my backhand. And that sequence was, when I was due for a posting, I was going to be either going to Moose Jaw to be an instructor there, I could go to a ground tour, or I could be an instructor on the F-101 Voodoo in Bagotville. In order to qualify to be an instructor on fighters at that time in Bagotville, you needed to either have the Air Weapons Instructor course, which is like a fighter weapons, a Top Gun course, or be an ICP. Since I met that criteria, I was now eligible to be posted to be an instructor up in Bagotville. And instructing, as many of you know, is a wonderful privilege. The Air Cadet organization, I understand, has a tremendous opportunity for very young cadets to learn their skills and then pass it on. And as you and I know, we don't have to discuss this, you really do learn your trade better when you're starting to teach. Well, while teaching there, Canada was in the throes of getting its new fighter aircraft. The NFA, as it was called. You know, we are actually at that period in our military lives right now where we're going through that again, where a decision is going to be made on the F-35 or the Super Hornet or perhaps a Typhoon or any combination. But the question was, who was going to be the very first to fly these airplanes? how are we going to select the people that are going to train the other people? I didn't think I had a chance. I was very young, I was very junior. But one of the criteria that was used was clearly that if you're going to be an instructor on this new aircraft to teach others, you had to have a fighter background. So that was the first criteria. The second criteria was that you had to have an instructional background. Well, you couldn't be an instructor unless you were an ICP. So as you can see, by working on my backhand, by getting my instrument skills up, by becoming an ICP, by becoming an instructor, suddenly I was posted as one of the first 13 pilots to fly the airplane. And I got to tell you, there's nothing like the new car smell. The airplane was new, it was dynamic, and the work that we had was intensive, but it was really very, very exciting, as you can imagine. And what made it even more exciting was Canada had to demonstrate this aircraft to the public. There was a lot of controversy. Did we buy the right airplane? We spent a lot of money. Was it worth it? And as a result, the government and the military had authorized, for the first time in over 2 decades, full aerobatics for a fighter aircraft to go on the tours with the Snowbirds. And I was one of the demonstration pilots right at the beginning to fly the aircraft in the air show realm. And it was a lot of fun and a great experience to be traveling throughout the country and demonstrating to the people that were very curious about the performance of this plane. One of the things that I didn't realize was a benefit, and this is where I'm getting back to the idea, is that we have no idea when we're working hard at the beginning, when we're getting that preparation for those opportunities, that what else could I benefit from? Obviously flying this airplane was exciting, but in retrospect, what I really, really go back and feel very, very blessed and lucky about was the people I was working with. I was surrounded by people who were like-minded, they were highly motivated, they were very focused and very skilled. And some of the people you may recognize. One of my students was this gentleman. How many have had a chance to read his book? Fantastic. There, in his book, is a whole hockey sock full of tools for your proverbial pouch. You see a lot of head nods, and I think you'll all agree. One of the things that he talks a lot about is decision making. And when he talks about decision making, I'm reminded of this quote that you may have heard. It says, "Be careful of your thoughts, because your thoughts become words. And be careful of your words, because your words, they become actions. And be careful of your actions, because your actions become habits. And your habits become your character, and ultimately your destiny." So if you roll that back, I want you to think very positively about the future and about your opportunities and how lucky and blessed you are to be in the Air Cadet organization, to be in Canada at this day and age, and all the opportunities that are ahead of you. Some of the other folks that I got to meet were equally talented. Another student of mine was a chap named Billy Flynn. Billy Flynn was married to Julie Payette, another astronaut. And look what he does today. This is a Canadian who is now the lead test pilot for the Lockheed F-35 program. I got to speak with him at the Abbotsford Air Show this year, and it was great to reminisce, and I got a better insight into what that aircraft's capability was. He did appreciate that he was a salesman, but he also has a great insight into the capabilities of this new aircraft. So my regular Air Force career was starting to draw to a close, and it was a very difficult time. The reason I decided to leave was I grew up in a military family and I didn't get to know my grandparents. I had a young child and another one was on the way, and I wanted them to have a better relationship, and I felt that I could only do that by living in a larger center. So I switched back out of the Reg Force and I went back into the Air Force Reserve in Winnipeg, where I started, and joined Air Canada. And in the reserve, I got to fly this aircraft. It's called the Jumpin' Technology Backwards. But I got to tell you, just because you're a fighter pilot doesn't mean you're going to be a good transport pilot. Just because you're an NHL hockey player doesn't mean you can play for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. However, the next bit of advice that I can share with you is that if you want to learn a new skill and you have previous background, the best advice I can tell you is that you take all of your knowledge, all of your experience, and you throw it in the back locker. You want to open your mind up to be a blank sponge. You want to learn like you were a 5-year-old. Think about if I brought a skateboard into this room and I gave it to a 6 or 7-year-old and I gave it to anyone else in this room and we got an hour and a half, I'd love to see what the demonstration would be. And it's the way children learn. They have no preconceived ideas. They have no biases. They don't try and lean as a crutch on their experience. So as a fighter pilot, I came into this job continually advising my instructors that I know nothing about transport airplanes, and I needed to learn everything I possibly could. When I was flying for Air Canada, they have a seniority system, so it doesn't matter if you're a rocket scientist or an astronaut or just barely got your commercial license. You start off in the most junior position, which at that time was the second officer position, the third seat of the 727. This panel looked very foreign to me. What didn't look as foreign was the back of the heads of the two gentlemen that I faced, and they were captain and first officer, and from them, it was a wonderful opportunity to learn about communication skills and leadership and decision making. And I was very impressed with the quality of the pilots at Air Canada, including my good friend, Captain Lamb. But one of the things that I think impressed me the most that I wasn't aware of was that I assumed that all of the good pilots would be military. And yet I was most impressed by a lot of the bush pilots. You see, in the military, we have the best training in the world. There's no doubt about that. I was a part of that. I benefited from it. But our training is discipline that's imposed on us. The bush pilot has to get his discipline from himself. He's sent up there with poor equipment, with maybe a boss that's putting a lot of pressure on him. And he has to make some decisions without any guidance. And if he survives that, and he does well, then he can become a very capable captain for the airline. One of the highlights for me in my aviation flying with the airline was when I got onto the DC-9, I actually got to fly with my older brother. He was Montreal based as a captain on the 9, and I'm going to show you a picture, and I want you to look at the instrument panel there. So it's fairly busy. Later on, George retired, and before he retired, he was on the Airbus A340, and so was I. So I had a second opportunity to fly with him. This time, this first trip was from Montreal to New York. The second time was from Calgary to Frankfurt, and it was just before 9/11, and my parents got to ride up on the flight deck. Here's what the picture of the cockpit looks like. You can see the instruments have changed. There's a little bit more gray on the temples. And my mom reminisced how I was in a high chair and my older brother was running around teasing me, so you could imagine the treat that she had on that day. Again, time moved on, and as David had alluded to, there was an opportunity calling me to fly overseas. And how that happened was my son became a pilot. He was trained out at Coastal Pacific Aviation, and he went up north and he flew for Ken Bork Air, but only on the ramp. He got a little bit of time swamping, and he was going the bush pilot route. There were very few opportunities, a very difficult time. And a friend of mine called me up and said, I want to hire your son. And I thought, okay, does he want him to clean an airplane or do some office work? And he said, what do you got? And he says, I've got a brand new Challenger 604. He said, I've never hired a co-pilot before. I've never hired anyone as young as your son. But I know your boy, and I want to take a chance. So at a very young age, my son had this opportunity to go fly overseas. And he was having a lot of fun over there, and I got more and more curious. So eventually, I followed my son's footpath. However, being an alpha male, I had to have a bigger jet. So I got to go on the Global Express, a Bombardier product here that's roughly the size of the DC-9. It weighs 98,000 pounds, about 100 feet long. And, a DC-9 holds 100 people. This thing holds 15. Has a 6,000 mile range. It goes up to 51,000 feet. We used to fly from Cairo to Chicago direct. And inside, it was built like an ultimate motorhome. The experience was incredible. The places I got to see, I flew to places like Paris and Rome and Cannes and Nice and even to North Korea. But the real highlight for me was when my son transferred over from the right seat of the 604 to get his captaincy on a smaller jet called the Cessna Citation 3. It was an 8-passenger airplane that had the capability to be single pilot captaincy. And I got to fly with him on many occasions as his co-pilot. So here he is at about flight level 410 over the Mediterranean, staring at his dad, who was proud as punch and feeling a little bit humble because I wasn't allowed to touch any of those pilot switches. It was an experience I'll never forget. So as you can see, you can keep saying, wow, that guy really is lucky. But I want to reinforce that success does leave clues. And no matter how much adversity you're faced, whatever setbacks that may happen in your future, you have an opportunity to look at it from two perspectives. You can simply look at it at face value, or you can hold your hand up like this and just turn it around just a little bit and say, with doors closed, what other ones are opening? And how can we make that just a little bit better? And when you focus on that, you're going to find that over time, those other tools that you've established will help you build your future. Before I wrap up, I've got to tell you that when I left Cyprus, I was getting a little bit, I was getting sad. We moved back to Canada. It took a couple of years to sell my house in the Mediterranean. And when it finally sold, I was swimming in the pool for the last time there, and the sun was shining, and I was looking at my wife, and I said, I'm really upset. I said, it's an end of a chapter. I'll never have a house in the Mediterranean again. I'll never have a house with a swimming pool again. And she said, don't worry. As soon as you get home, there'll be another adventure. And honest to goodness, we landed in Vancouver. We didn't even get to Comox, and the phone rang. And it was an Air Force friend who actually happened to fly with Air Canada as well. And he said, Dale, I got to talk to you. We've got a team of guys that have, we're all ex-military. And we want to honor the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Vimy. We consider it part of the birth of a nation. And we want to do a reenactment by bringing over biplanes, replica biplanes, and then flying them all the way across Canada. Now, initially, I thought he was crazy. I thought, there's no way this is going to work. And I was just about to have that road to mediocrity hit me in the nose when I realized, no, this is an opportunity of a lifetime. I have to grab it. So these are the aircraft that we're involved with. They are called Newport 11s. They were designed in 1911 in Newport, France. They were originally designed before the First World War as a racing plane. And they proved very useful, and eventually the Brits bought them and used them in the First World War, as did the Italians and eventually the Russians. So there's 4 of these, as well as 2 Sopwith pups. Now, unfortunately, one of the aircraft meant a couple of very serious prangs, and the pilot was not too badly injured, but he was kindly asked by the insurance company to leave the team. And so we were looking for another airplane. And we almost bought another one, and then that fell through. So I was starting to start the hunt as well, and one came up just down the road. It was in Nanaimo. A carpenter was working on this thing for 10 years. He never flew it. Here's a picture of the 1936 dedication by King Edward. And you can see the crowds that are there, and you can imagine what's going to happen next year on April 9th. Are there any squadrons trying to send any cadets over there this year? I know that EF Tours, there are a few. EF Tours is bringing 9,000 officers, cadets, teachers, and students over to Vimy for this celebration. And they've been in contact with us, and they want to use one of our airplanes as static. So anyway, the aircraft came up. Is this going to work? Here we go. In Nanaimo, I brought it back to the hangar, and I had to start working on it. There was some mods that needed to be done. One, it needed a bigger tail. And I had already built an ultralight, so I was fairly familiar with the tube and fabric system. This is a pop riveted structure, so it uses aircraft grade aluminum. And you simply bend some aluminum, you cover it with fabric that you iron to shrink, and then you paint it. Now, the landing gear was very heavy, and it needed to be upgraded. And so I ordered these very special motorcycle rims from a KTM 80 kid's dirt bike. And then we decided we were going to put mountain bike brakes on them, but we needed an adapter. And I tell you, that's way over my skill set. So I have a friend who's also the lead maintenance officer for our program. He's the only civilian on our team, and he's the only one who's got a secret security clearance, because this machinist millwright has actually worked in the in the bowels of our O'Brien-class submarines, turning the machinery on it. And to give you an idea of his skill set, he's taken this chunk of aluminum. The picture doesn't show it very well, but if you can imagine a large, can of beans that weighs about 30 pounds, that's a chunk of aluminum, and he's machined it into this beautiful piece of art. And that's an adapter that converts from that mountain bike brake that can go on to the rim. And the black device there on the right is to support the brake caliper itself. This is the end result. And I got to tell you that my brakes are the envy of the teams. They work like a charm. The other guys, they can barely get 1,300 RPM out of their engine before they start creeping forward with their old drum brakes, and I can go full pull up to 3,600 RPM and hang on those brakes.
Is it bungee corded?
That's what you see as bungee cord. That's a suspension system, and it works very, very well. It looks very fragile, and I got to tell you, the airplanes are very fragile. But compared to what they had back in the First World War, these things are rugged. Here's what the cockpit looks like. It's not quite what the Airbus was like, and it's certainly a lot smaller. I upgraded the fuel tank. The original builder had a galvanized metal soldered fuel tank. It looked like he used a bit of JB Wells on the bottom, and since it sat on your lap, I thought it would be more prudent to get a professionally welded tank. Had to have some fun. One of the guys had a smoke system on board, so we thought, well, gee, if we're going to do this, we have to have a nice smoke system. And through the powers of the internet and the community, how do you build a smoke system for something like this? Well, you go to an auto wrecker and you get a Dodge Neon windshield washer reservoir and pump, because this is only a partial picture of it, but it's very small and narrow. It's long and narrow, so it fits up between the fuel tank and the firewall. And then you have the pump squirt the smoke oil through a copper tubing that's wrapped around the exhaust and into each exhaust. Now, I'm on the West Coast, so we're pretty environmentally concerned, so I use a very special smoke oil that's actually made out of vegetable oil that has special oxygen molecules added to it. And it's got the added benefit that when I fly over, you've got this real hankering to go over to McDonald's and have some French fries. We'd love to have the original engine, which is the Gnome rotary engine, but we've chosen a more reliable, which is a Volkswagen derivative. This is a Volkswagen block, but it's really upgraded to aircraft quality. Dual plugs per cylinder. I've got electronic ignition, and it's throttle body fuel injected. So we got permission from 19-wing Comox to store the aircraft in their hangar. General Hood, the commander of the RCAF, is a big supporter of our initiative, and he's working the problem as best as he can. And I got to tell you, there's a lot of political hurdles that we have to go through. Veteran Affairs is very supportive of us, but it's taking a lot of work. But closer to home, in Comox, 19-wing has allowed us to put the aircraft in their hangars, and we've been able to train all of our pilots now. We have 9 pilots, and we're all qualified on the aircraft. And we even use the control tower as a mock-up for the memorial itself, which the tower controllers really appreciated. We're going to be traveling across Canada by air when we finish Vimy. Obviously, for the longer distances, we're probably going to have to get something like this. This is just a photographic impression, but we're going to be traveling through communities across the country, and we're going to be in Saskatchewan. So I hope that you will be able to come aboard and your squadrons will be ready to start to participate. Perhaps some of you can get some mock-up uniforms, and because it's the young people that we're trying to represent. Those were the real heroes back in that First World War. So we look forward to that. I guess I'm one of the few guys that have flown both of those airplanes. But we really want to honor our airmen from the Great War and the contribution that they made, not only to the Battle of Vimy, but for the victory of Canada all in all. There is a trailer, a movie trailer I was going to play for you, but we don't have any sound, so I'm going to dispatch with that. You can go online to A Nation Soars or Vimy Flight, join the Facebook page, look at our webpage, and the documentaries. There's 3 one-hour documentaries being done by Dan Aykroyd, who's going to be our narrator. So this is reaching a really high profile, and we're pretty proud and excited about it. And I hope that in 2017 we're going to see you either in Vimy, France, or along the way. But for now, it's been an absolute privilege to speak to such a valuable portion of our of our citizens of Canada, you folks here tonight. And I want to thank you for your time. You've been very patient, and I'll hand the mic back. Thank you.